He walked into the restaurant wearing a $10,000 suit and a smile that said he owned the world. Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire who made a sport of destroying companies and humiliating employees, thought tonight would be just another game. He spotted a quiet waitress and decided she would be his entertainment. He offered her a challenge, a simple trick question about economics designed to mock her intelligence in front of his wealthy friends. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to cry, but he didn't know that the woman in the apron wasn't just a server. She was the one ghost from his past he never expected to see again. And her answer didn't just win the game. It cost him his entire empire. The distinct rhythmic clack of hard-soled Italian leather on marble echoed through the foyer of the Obsidian, Chicago's most exclusive dining establishment. It was Friday night, the air thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive perfume, and the quiet desperation of social climbers. Julian Thorne didn't just enter a room, he invaded it. At 34, Julian was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. In layman's terms, he bought struggling family businesses, stripped them of their pensions and patents, and sold the carcasses for parts. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline eyes the color of cold steel, and a bespoke navy Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. "Table 4, the booth in the back, and get that flickering candle replaced before I sit down," Julian barked at the hostess, not bothering to make eye contact. He swept past her, followed by his entourage, 2 junior executives named Brett and Cole, who laughed too hard at his jokes, and his date for the evening, a runway model named Chloe, who looked terrified to touch the breadbasket. From the shadows of the service station, Elena Vance watched him. Elena was 32, though the tired lines around her eyes made her look older tonight. She adjusted her black apron, smoothing the fabric over her waist. Her hair was pulled back in a severe practical bun, and her uniform was immaculate. To the patrons of the Obsidian, she was invisible. A pair of hands that delivered wine, a nod that acknowledged orders, a fixture like the sconces on the wall. "He's in your section, Elle," whispered Sarah, a younger waitress, trembling as she held a tray of martinis. "That's Julian Thorne. He made Jessica cry last month because she poured the sparkling water too aggressively. Do you want me to trade tables?" Elena's expression didn't change. She stared at Julian, who was currently snapping his fingers at a busboy to move his chair 3 inches to the left. "No," Elena said, her voice a low, calm contralto. "I'll take him. Are you sure he's in a mood?" "I saw the news on the TV in the break room. He just acquired that massive pharmaceutical company in a hostile takeover. He's feeling invincible." "Invincibility is usually a temporary condition," Elena murmured. She picked up the leather-bound menus. "Go check on table 7, Sarah. I've got Mr. Thorne." As Elena walked toward the table, she didn't rush. She moved with a fluid, practiced grace. She knew men like Julian. She knew the taxonomy of the arrogant billionaire. They were fueled by 2 things, validation and domination. If you denied them one, they demanded the other. "Gentlemen, miss," Elena said, placing the menus down with precision. "Welcome to the Obsidian. I'm Elena, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Julian didn't look up from his phone. He was scrolling through stock tickers. "We're not reading. We're drinking. Bring me a bottle of the 98 Petrus. And tell the chef I want the tasting menu, but substitute the scallop course for the Wagyu. And have it done medium rare, not that raw nonsense he tries to pass off as art." "The 98 Petrus is an excellent choice, sir," Elena said smoothly, However, the sommelier recommends decanting it for at least 45 minutes to allow the tannins to soften. Would you like a starter bottle of the... Julian finally looked up. His eyes narrowed. He hated being corrected, even if it was helpful. "Did I ask for a lecture?" Julian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The table went silent. Brett and Cole stopped, snickering. Chloe stared at her napkin. "I asked for a bottle," Julian continued, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Open it. Pour it. If I wanted a lesson on tannins, I'd buy a vineyard. Do you understand, or is the English language a barrier for you?" Elena held his gaze. For a second, just a split second, a spark of something dangerous flashed in her eyes, a hardness that didn't belong to a waitress. But she blinked, and it was gone. "Perfectly, sir," she said. "I'll bring the bottle immediately." As she walked away, she heard Julian laugh. God, it's like they hire them based on their ability to be deaf and dumb. It's charming, really. The help tries so hard. Elena walked into the kitchen, her grip on the serving tray tightening until her knuckles turned white. She exhaled slowly. Patience, she told herself. The night is young. By the third course, the atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from boisterous to cruel. The wine had been flowing. Julian had ignored the advice and drank the Petrus too fast, and was now on his second bottle of a heavy Cabernet. He was holding court, regaling his sycophants with the story of his latest conquest. "So the CEO old guy real tear-jerker type starts begging me," Julian said, gesturing with a forkful of lobster. He says, "Mr. Thorne, my family has owned this factory for 3 generations." And I looked at him and said, "That's the problem, Bob. Sentimentality is a liability on the balance sheet." Bought the debt foreclosed on the property, and fired the board this morning. Net profit 40 million by next quarter. Brett slapped the table. "You're a savage, Julian. A literal savage." "It's not savagery, it's evolution," Julian declared. He looked around, bored. His eyes landed on Elena, who was silently refilling the water glasses. He needed a new game. The story was over, and he needed fresh entertainment. "You," Julian said, pointing his knife at Elena. "Waitress. What's your name again, Ellen?" "Elena, sir." "Elena. Tell me, Elena, what do you think of that story? Do you think I'm a bad man for firing 3,000 people to make the stock price jump? It was a trap. If she said yes, she was rude, and he'd get her fired. If she said no, she was submissive, and he'd mock her for having no morals." Elena stopped pouring. She set the pitcher down. "I think, sir, that efficiency often looks like cruelty to those who don't understand the endgame." Julian blinked. It was a diplomatic answer. Too diplomatic. He didn't like it. He wanted to see her squirm. He wanted to prove that the gap between him and her wasn't just money, it was biology. Intellect. "An answer straight out of a PR handbook," Julian sneered. "Tell me, how much do they pay you here? Minimum wage plus tips." "What is that? 30 grand a year?" 40 if you smile enough." "I get by, sir," Elena said quietly. "You get by," Julian mocked. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and fanned them out on the white tablecloth next to the candle. "Let's play a game, Elena. I'm bored and the Wagyu is taking too long." "Julian, don't," Chloe whispered, touching his arm. "She's just working." "Quiet, Chloe. The adults are talking." Julian looked at Elena with a shark-like grin. "I'm going to ask you a question. A test of your critical thinking. If you get it right, this $500 is yours, tax-free. Probably more than you make in a week. Elena looked at the money, then at Julian. And if I get it wrong? If you get it wrong? Julian leaned in his eyes, gleaming with malice. You have to stand on that chair and announce to the entire restaurant that Julian Thorne is the smartest man in Chicago. The table erupted in nervous laughter. Brett and Cole looked uncomfortable, but didn't dare interrupt the boss. I'm here to serve food, Mr. Thorne, not to be your entertainment, Elena said, her voice stealing. Oh, come on. Are you scared? It's just a question, unless you know you're too stupid to answer it. He took a sip of wine. That's it, isn't it? You know your place. The restaurant seemed to quiet down. People at nearby tables were glancing over. The tension was palpable. Julian was bullying a server, and no one was stopping him because he was Julian Thorne. Elena took a breath. She looked at the bills on the table. Then she looked at Julian's smug face. She recognized that look. She had seen it in boardrooms in Tokyo, London, and New York. The look of a man who had never lost. Ask your question, Elena said. Julian clapped his hands together, delighted. Brave, I like it. Foolish, but brave. He sat back, swirling his wine glass. He wanted something impossible, something she couldn't possibly know. He wouldn't ask about pop culture or sports. He would ask about his world, the world of high finance and elite strategy. He wanted to expose her ignorance so thoroughly that she would feel small forever. Let's talk about value, Julian began, his voice taking on a professorial, condescending tone. I just acquired a logistics firm. We are looking at the Veblen effect regarding their branding. He paused, waiting for her to look confused. She didn't. Here is the question, Julian said, holding up a finger. I am considering a leveraged buyout of a competitor, Kensington Steel. The company has high assets but low cash flow. If I buy Kensington using 80% debt financing at a 7% interest rate, but the company's return on assets ROA is only 5%, classic economics says I lose money. I go into negative leverage. I bleed cash. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. Yet I am going to do the deal next Monday. And I guarantee you I will make $100 million in the first year without firing a single employee or selling a single asset. How is that mathematically possible? What is the one hidden variable I am exploiting that a waitress could never understand? Brett and Cole looked at each other. Even they didn't know the answer. This was a specific, complex financial structure involving tax loopholes or derivatives. It was a question for a CFO, not a server. You have 10 seconds, Julian smirked. Tick-tock. Chloe looked down, unable to watch. Julian, this is cruel. 5 seconds, Julian counted. Better warm up your voice for your announcement. Elena stood perfectly still. Her mind didn't panic. Instead, it clicked into a gear she hadn't used in 3 years. She visualized the balance sheet of a company like Kensington Steel. She thought about the year. She thought about the location. And then she remembered who Julian was. He was a predator. He didn't build. He exploited. Time's up. Julian slammed his hand on the table. Up on the chair, Elena. Say it loud. You're not buying Kensington Steel for the steel, Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a scalpel. Julian froze. Excuse me. You asked how you make a profit with negative leverage. Elena continued, her tone shifting. The waitress voice was gone. In its place was the authoritative cadence of an executive. You can't make a profit from the operations If the interest rate is higher than the return on assets, the math is absolute. Exactly, Julian sneered. So I'm a magician, and you lose. No, Elena said, taking a step closer to the table. You aren't relying on operations. You're relying on the Pension Protection Act of 2006 regarding legacy real estate assets. The color drained from Julian's face. Kensington Steel owns its land, Elena explained, looking directly at Brett and Cole, who were now gaping at her. They've owned it since the 1920s. On their books, the land is valued at purchase price peanuts. But Kensington is located in the new Green Zone redevelopment district the city just approved last month. The land isn't worth millions. It's worth billions. She turned her eyes back to Julian. You aren't buying a steel company, Mr. Thorne. You're buying a real estate portfolio disguised as a factory. You'll take the 80% debt. Use the reappraised value of the land to refinance the loan immediately at a lower rate, because your collateral value just tripled, and then you'll strip the pension fund to pay the closing costs. You make your $100 million on the refinance spread, not the steel. The silence at table 4 was deafening. It was heavy, suffocating silence. Julian's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been struck in the chest. This wasn't public information. The zoning details were buried in city council minutes. The refinancing strategy was something only his inner circle knew. Elena reached down to the table. She didn't take the money. Instead, she pushed the $500 back toward him. But you missed one thing, Mr. Thorne, Elena added, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. The Green Zone Redevelopment Act has a clause. Section 4, paragraph B. It prevents rezoning for commercial use if the land has been used for heavy industrial waste for more than 50 years. Kensington has been dumping slag there since 1925. Julian's eyes went wide. You can't rezone it, Elena said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. Which means you can't refinance. Which means you're about to take on 80% debt on a dying steel mill with a 5% return against a 7% loan. She picked up the empty wine bottle. You're not a genius, Mr. Thorne. If you sign that deal on Monday, you're bankrupt. The silence that had descended over table 4 was no longer just awkward. It was heavy, suffocating, and tasted like ash. The surrounding sounds of the obsidian, the clinking of crystal, the low hum of jazz, the laughter of people who had no idea a billion-dollar empire was teetering on the edge of a precipice, seemed to fade into a dull roar in Julian Thorne's ears. Julian stared at Elena. He looked for the telltale signs of a bluff. He looked for the twitch of an eye, the nervous shifting of weight, the smirk of a prankster. But Elena Vance stood there with the composure of a statue. Her face was a mask of professional indifference, yet her eyes held a depth of knowledge that terrified him. Section 4, paragraph B. Julian repeated his voice, barely a whisper. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Heavy industrial waste, Elena confirmed, her voice steady. The soil toxicity reports were filed with the EPA in 1982. They are public record, Mr. Thorne. But since your due diligence team was likely focused on the current asset valuation and the projected zoning maps, they missed the historical exclusion clause. It's a common mistake. For amateurs. The insult landed like a physical blow. Julian flinched. Brett, Julian snapped, not taking his eyes off Elena. Phone, now. Sir, Brett stammered, holding his fork halfway to his mouth. Give me your damn tablet. Pull up the diligence files on Kensington. Now! Julian roared, causing the couple at the adjacent table to jump. Brett scrambled, fumbling with his leather satchel, dropping a napkin in his panic. He produced a sleek tablet and handed it to Julian with trembling hands. Julian snatched it, his fingers flying across the screen. He logged into the secure data room. He frantically scrolled through the hundreds of PDF documents related to the acquisition. Search, Julian muttered to himself, sweat beading on his forehead. Environmental, historical, EPA. It won't be in the main folder, Elena said helpfully, pouring more water into Chloe's glass as if nothing were happening. Check the addendum to the title report. Page 402. Julian's head snapped up. How do you know the page number? I have a good memory, she said simply. Julian navigated to the addendum. He scrolled. Page 399, page 400, page 401, page 402. There it was, a scanned document, yellowed with age, embedded in the digital file. City Ordinance 19B, Restriction of Commercial Development on Class 4 Industrial Sites. It explicitly named the Kensington lot coordinates. Julian read the paragraph. He read it again. Shall remain designated for industrial use only, or be subject to a mandated 50-year soil remediation process prior to any residential or commercial rezoning. 50 years. Remediation. Elena was right. If he bought the company on Monday, he would be the proud owner of a toxic wasteland that he couldn't sell, couldn't develop, and couldn't rezone. The land wasn't worth billions. It was a liability worth negative $50 million in cleanup costs alone. The debt he was about to take on would crush Thorne Dynamics within 6 months. He had been standing on the train tracks, and this waitress had just pushed him out of the way of the locomotive. Julian slowly lowered the tablet. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had almost lost everything. His reputation, his fortune, his ego. He looked up at Elena. A normal man would have been relieved. A good man would have been grateful. He would have stood up, shaken her hand, and written her a check for $50,000 on the spot. But Julian Thorne was not a good man. He was a narcissist who had built his life on the belief that he was the smartest person in every room. And in front of his subordinates, his date, and the entire restaurant, a waitress earning tips had just proven that he was a fool. Gratitude didn't wash over him. Humiliation did. And humiliation in a man like Julian quickly curdled into rage. "Who are you?" Julian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I told you, I'm Elena." "No." Julian stood up, knocking his chair back. It clattered loudly against the floor. Waitresses don't know about EPA soil remediation clauses. Waitresses don't know how to structure a leveraged buyout. Who sent you? Was it Sterling? Is this a setup? "Mr. Thorne, please sit down," Elena said, stepping back slightly. "You're making a scene." "I don't care about the scene," Julian shouted. "You're a corporate spy. That's the only explanation. You've been planting information, haven't you? Or maybe you hacked our servers. How else would you know about the deal closing on Monday? That is privileged information. It was in the Financial Times this morning. Page 6, Elena replied calmly. And the Kensington history is in the local library. I read. Unlike you, apparently. Brett and Cole gasped. Chloe covered her mouth with her hand. Julian's face turned a shade of crimson that matched the Cabernet he had been drinking. He felt exposed, naked. She wasn't just defeating him. She was dismantling him. "You think you're smart," Julian hissed, leaning over the table, invading her personal space. You think you can humiliate me? I own this town. I can buy and sell your entire existence before breakfast. You almost bought a bankruptcy, Elena reminded him cold-heartedly. You should be thanking me. Thank you. Julian laughed, a manic, jagged sound. You think I'm going to thank a servant for eavesdropping on my private conversation? You think I'm going to let you walk away and tell everyone that Julian Thorne almost made a mistake? No. He straightened his jacket, buttoning it with trembling fingers. His eyes went dead. The predator was back and he was cornered. Manager, Julian bellowed. Get the manager out here. Now! The restaurant manager, a short, nervous man named Mr. Henderson, materialized almost instantly. He looked like he was walking to his own execution. He knew Julian Thorne. He knew the amount of money Julian spent at the Obsidian. He also knew that if Julian was unhappy, the restaurant's rating would plummet overnight. Mr. Thorne, Henderson said, wringing his hands, sweat glistening on his bald pate. Is there a problem? Was the steak not to your liking? I can have the chef. The steak is fine, Julian spat. The problem is the staff, specifically her. He pointed a manicured finger at Elena. Elena stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her posture perfect. She didn't plead. She didn't look at Henderson with puppy dog eyes. She simply waited. Elena? Henderson looked confused. Elena is our best server. She is a liability. Julian cut him off. She has been harassing my table all night. She has been eavesdropping on confidential business conversations, and just now... Julian lowered his voice, acting the part of the victim perfectly. She tried to extort me. Elena's eyes widened slightly. That is a lie. She claimed she heard private financial details. Julian lied smoothly, finding his footing again. And she implied that if I didn't give her a massive tip, $5,000 to be exact, she would leak false rumors to the press about my company. She threatened my stock price, Henderson. It was an outrageous lie, absurd. But Julian said it with the conviction of a man who believed his own narrative. I did no such thing, Eleanor said, looking at Henderson. Mr. Thorne proposed a wager. He asked me a question about his business. I answered it. He didn't like the answer because it exposed his own incompetence. Incompetence! Julian shouted, turning to the other diners, who were now watching with rapt attention. Did you hear that? She just insulted a guest. I am Julian Thorne. I run a $4 billion fund. And this nobody calls me incompetent. He turned back to Henderson, his eyes hard as diamonds. Fire her, Julian commanded. Mr. Thorne, surely we can just assign another server. Henderson began weak-kneed. I said fire her. Julian stepped closer to the manager. Right now. If she is still employed at this restaurant in 2 minutes, I will buy this building, evict you, and turn this place into a parking lot. And then I will ensure that you never manage so much as a taco stand in this city again. Do you understand me? Henderson looked at Julian. Then he looked at Elena. It wasn't a fair choice. It wasn't a moral choice. But in the world of high-end service, the customer, especially the billionaire customer, was God. Henderson couldn't meet Elena's eyes. He looked at the floor. Elena, Henderson whispered. I'm sorry. Mr. Henderson, you know he's lying, Elena said softly. There was a crack in her voice now. Not of sadness, but of frustration. She needed this job. She needed the health insurance. Give me your apron, Henderson said, his voice trembling. Please, don't make a scene, just go. Elena looked at Julian. He was smiling now. The color had returned to his cheeks. He had won. He had erased the witness to his foolishness. By destroying her credibility and her livelihood, he felt he had regained his power. "You see, Elena," Julian whispered, leaning in so only she could hear. "It doesn't matter if you're right. It matters who holds the checkbook. That is the only lesson in economics you need." Elena slowly reached behind her back and untied her apron. She folded it neatly. She placed it on the empty chair next to Julian. She looked at the $500 that was still sitting on the table, the bait for the trick question. "You can keep your money," Eleanor said, loud enough for the table to hear. "You're going to need it for the lawyers when your investors find out you almost torched their portfolios." She turned to leave. "Get out!" Julian yelled after her. "And if you ever try to get a job in this city again, I'll make sure you starve." Elena walked through the dining room. She could feel the eyes of every patron on her. The pity. The judgment. She walked past the hostess stand, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and stepped out into the cool Chicago night. The wind hit her face, drying the single tear that had escaped. She stood on the sidewalk, shivering slightly in her thin white shirt. She was unemployed. She had rent due in 3 days. Her mother's medical bills were sitting on her kitchen counter, a stack of envelopes written in red ink. Julian Thorne had taken her dignity and her paycheck in the span of 10 minutes, all to soothe his bruised ego. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was an old model, the screen cracked. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. A number she swore she would never call again. It rang once, twice. "Hello." A deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. "This is a private line. Who is this?" "It's Elena," she said, her voice hard as flint. There was a long silence on the other end. "Elena." The voice softened, tinged with disbelief. "Elena Vance? My God, it's been... Are you okay? We thought you fell off the face of the earth." "I'm not okay, Marcus," she said, watching through the window of the obsidian as Julian laughed and toasted with his wine glass. "I need a favor. No, I don't need a favor. I need a job. You know the door at Sterling & Co. is always open for you," the man named Marcus said. "But you said you were done. You said the game was too dirty." "It is dirty," Elena said, her eyes narrowing as she watched Julian Thorne take a bite of his Wagyu beef. "But I think it's time I got my hands dirty again. I have a target, Marcus." "Oh." Marcus sounded intrigued. "Who is the unlucky soul?" "Julian Thorne," Elena said. "And I don't just want to beat him. I want to bury him." The glass walls of the Sterling Capital headquarters on the 88th floor offered a panoramic view of Chicago, a sprawling grid of amber lights and dark water. It was a view reserved for the masters of the universe, the men and women who moved markets with a whisper. Marcus Sterling stood by the window swirling a glass of scotch. He was 60, with a mane of silver hair and the build of a retired linebacker. He was a legend on Wall Street, a man known for ruthless efficiency, but unshakable ethics. The elevator doors hissed open. Elena stepped out. She looked different. The waitress uniform was gone, replaced by a pair of jeans and a leather jacket she had dug out of the back of her closet. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in dark waves, but the biggest change was in her eyes. The deference of the service industry was gone. The predator was back. "You look like hell, Elle," Marcus said, turning to face her. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. "It's been a long 3 years, Marcus." Elena replied, walking over to the leather armchairs and sitting down without asking. She didn't look at the view. She had seen it 1,000 times before. I heard about what happened at the Obsidian, Marcus said, sitting opposite her. News travels fast. Julian Thorne making a scene, that's Tuesday, but a waitress embarrassing him on a complex LBO structure. That's news. My phone started buzzing 10 minutes ago. He's going to buy Kensington Steel, Elena said, skipping the pleasantries. He's ignoring the EPA clause. Or rather, he's going to try to bury it. Marcus nodded slowly. That sounds like Julian. He's over-leveraged on his last 2 deals. If he pulls out of Kensington now, the break fees will cripple his liquidity. He has to buy it. He's betting he can bribe the zoning commission or flip the land to some unsuspecting pension fund before the soil reports go public. He's going to defraud investors, Elena said. Again. And you want to stop him? No. Elena looked up, her expression cold. I don't want to stop him. I want to let him hang himself, and then I want to kick the chair. Marcus took a sip of his drink. He studied her for a moment. He remembered when he first hired her fresh out of Wharton. She was a prodigy. She could see patterns in the market that algorithms missed. She had made sterling capital billions before the stress and the toxicity of the industry broke her spirit. She had left to find real life to serve coffee and talk to normal people. But Julian Thorne had reminded her that real life was just as cruel as Wall Street, only with worse pay. I have a plan, Elena said, but I need capital, and I need a cover. You have the capital, Marcus said effortlessly. Your equity share from your time here is still in the trust. You have roughly 12 million in liquid assets, Elena. You're not poor. You were just hiding. Elena paused. She had forgotten the money. She had ignored the statements for years, living off her tips to punish herself for a mistake she made years ago. A deal that went wrong and hurt a family business. She had been doing penance, but penance was over. 12 million isn't enough to hurt Thorne, Elena calculated. His fund is worth 4 billion. No. Marcus grinned, a shark-like expression that matched hers. But 12 million is enough to buy the entrance ticket to the game. What's the play? Julian needs a bridge loan. Eleanor explained, her mind working at light speed. If he buys Kensington, he can't use traditional banks for the remediation costs because he's hiding the toxicity. He'll need private credit, high-interest off-the-books financing to modernize the facility before he flips it. He'll go to the shadow lenders, Marcus agreed. He'll go to Vanguard Shadow, Elena corrected, because Vanguard Shadow is the only firm aggressive enough to fund a deal that risky in 48 hours. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Vanguard Shadow doesn't exist. It does as of tomorrow morning, Elena said. You set up the shell. I'll front the face. We offer him the money he needs to close the Kensington deal. We let him buy the toxic land. We let him think he's safe. And the catch is in the collateral agreement, Elena said. We don't take the land as collateral. We take his personal stake in Thorne Dynamics, and we add a material adverse change clause triggered by, let's say, an EPA investigation. Marcus whistled low. You're going to lend him the money to buy the poison, then call the cops on the poison trigger the default, and seize his entire company. He humiliated me for $500, Elena said, standing up and walking to the window. She looked out at the city, her reflection superimposed over the lights. I'm going to take his company for 10 cents on the dollar. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. Welcome back, Elena. I've missed this. The following morning, a.m. Julian Thorne was pacing in his office, his suit jacket thrown over a chair. His office was a temple to his ego, modern art, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a desk made of reclaimed aircraft aluminum. But the air in the room was stale with panic. "The EPA report is real," Brett said, his voice shaking. He was standing by the door, afraid to come closer. "We pulled the archives this morning. That waitress, she was right. Kensington is a Superfund site waiting to happen." "I know she was right," Julian screamed, throwing a crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against the wall. "I don't pay you to tell me what a waitress knows. I pay you to fix it." "Sir, we can back out," Cole suggested timidly from the couch. "We pay the break fee. It's $20 million. We take the hit." "I can't take a $20 million hit," Julian roared. "The board is already breathing down my neck about the farmer acquisition. If I show a loss this quarter, they'll trigger a vote of no confidence. I have to close this deal. I have to flip that land." "But who will lend us the $100 million for the closing?" Brett asked. "The banks won't touch it with the soil issues." "Find me a lender," Julian barked. "I don't care what the rate is. Find me someone greedy. Find me someone who doesn't ask questions. Get me the money, I buy the land, I bribe the inspector to delay the report for 6 months, and I sell the parcel to the pension fund in Dubai. They don't check EPA logs." The intercom buzzed. It was his secretary, her voice trembling. "Mr. Thorne, there's an offer coming through on the secure fax. It's from a private equity firm called Vanguard Shadow." Julian stopped pacing. "I've never heard of them." "They're new," Brett said, checking his tablet. "Registered in the Caymans. Deep pockets. They specialize in distressed opportunities." "What's the offer?" Julian demanded. "They're offering $150 million, the secretary continued. "Full financing for the Kensington acquisition. Fast close. Funds available by Monday morning." Julian smiled, a slow, cruel smile. "God, I love greedy people. They smell blood, and they come running." "What are the terms?" Cole asked. "Who cares?" Julian laughed, grabbing his jacket. "We're going to refinance it in a month anyway, once I sell the land. Set up the meeting. I want to meet the head of this Vanguard Shadow." "They requested a meeting tonight," the secretary said. "At the Blackwood Gala." Julian paused. The Blackwood Gala was the most exclusive event of the season. Only the inner circle was entered. If this new firm had a table there, they were real players. "Perfect." Julian adjusted his tie in the reflection of the window. "I'll charm them, take their money, and bury this mess. And as for that waitress, she's probably scanning want ads right now." He didn't know that the waitress was currently sitting in a stylist's chair 3 blocks away, having diamonds draped around her neck that cost more than his car. The Blackwood Gala, 8:00 p.m. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a winter garden, white roses, ice sculptures, and a string quartet playing Mozart. The room was filled with the 1% of the 1%. Men in tuxedos, women in couture gowns. Julian Thorne entered with Chloe on his arm. He looked regal. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, flashing his white teeth, pretending he wasn't technically insolvent. "Julian!" a voice called out. It was a competitor, an older man named Sterling. Julian stiffened. He hated Marcus Sterling. Sterling was the old guard, moralistic, boring, and rich. "Marcus," Julian nodded curtly. "Enjoying the party?" "Immensely," Marcus smiled. "I heard you're closing the Kensington deal. Bold move." "Fortune favors the bold," Julian said aggressively. "Something you forgot years ago, Marcus?" "Perhaps." Marcus chuckled. "By the way, have you met my new partner? She runs our special situations fund, Vanguard Shadow." Julian's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The lenders. "I haven't," Julian said, straightening up. "I'm looking forward to doing business with her." "She's right over there." Marcus gestured toward the balcony doors. "She's been dying to talk to you. She says you've met before." Julian frowned. Met before. He walked toward the balcony. The air was cooler here. A woman was standing with her back to him, looking out at the night sky. She was wearing a backless emerald green gown that shimmered like liquid money. Her hair was pinned up in an intricate, elegant style. "Ms." Julian started putting on his charm. "I'm Julian Thorne. I believe we have a deal to discuss." The woman turned around slowly. Julian stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was her. But it wasn't her. The face was the same, the high cheekbones, the dark, intelligent eyes. But the waitress from the Obsidian was gone. In her place was a queen. She radiated power. The diamonds at her throat caught the light, and her posture was one of absolute command. "Hello, Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and devoid of the subservience she had feigned the night before. "Elena," Julian choked out. He looked around, checking if this was a joke. "What are you doing here? How did you get in? Did you sneak in to beg for your job back?" He laughed nervously. "Security. I need security." "Lower your voice," Elena said. She didn't shout, but the command was so absolute that Julian's mouth snapped shut. "You're not speaking to a waitress tonight, Julian. You're speaking to the managing partner of Vanguard Shadow." Julian stared at her. His brain couldn't compute it. You're the lender." "I am." Elena stepped closer, the heels of her Louboutins clicking on the stone floor. "And I have the contract right here." She lifted a document folder from the stone railing. $150 million, Elena said. "Wire transfer ready to go. You get your Kensington steel. You save your reputation. You save your quarterly report." Julian looked at the folder, then at her. He was reeling. "You were playing me at the restaurant." "I was observing you," Elena corrected. "I wanted to see if the rumors were true. If Julian Thorne was really as arrogant and careless as they said. You exceeded expectations. Why would you lend me money?" Julian narrowed his eyes. "You hate me. I fired you." "Business is business." Elena shrugged, channeling the coldness he had displayed the night before. "You need money. I have money. The interest rate is 15%. I stand to make a healthy profit from your desperation. Isn't that what you told me? Efficiency looks like cruelty to those who don't understand the end game." She quoted his own words back to him. It was a masterstroke. It appealed to his greed. He thought she was like him, a mercenary. He could understand a mercenary. He couldn't understand a victim. 15% is robbery." Julian grunted, but he reached for the folder. "Take it or leave it," Elena said. "The market's open in 12 hours. Without this cash, you're in breach of contract on the acquisition." Julian hesitated. He looked at her eyes. He saw nothing but cold calculation. He convinced himself that he had won. She was just a player, and he was the king. He would take her money, use it, and then screw her over later. "Fine." Julian pulled a gold pen from his pocket. He flipped to the signature page. He didn't read the fine print. He never read the fine print when he was desperate. He signed his name with a flourish. Julian Thorne. "Done," he smirked, handing the folder back. "Pleasure doing business with you, Elena. You clean up nice. Maybe you should have worn that dress while you were serving my steak." He laughed, patting her on the shoulder, and walked back into the party feeling triumphant. Elena watched him go. She looked down at the signature. Marcus stepped out of the shadows from the adjacent balcony. "Did he sign it?" Marcus asked. "He signed," Elena said. "Did he read the default clause, the one where Vanguard Shadow retains the right to immediate repayment in full if any undisclosed environmental liabilities are discovered within 48 hours? No. Elena smiled a genuine, dangerous smile. He didn't read a word. So what happens now? Elena pulled out her phone. She dialed a contact saved as EPA District Director. Now, Elena said, I make a phone call. Monday morning arrived with the deceptive calm of a hurricane's eye. The sky over Chicago was a bruised purple threatening rain. Inside the headquarters of Thorne Dynamics, champagne corks were popping. Julian Thorne stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, his arms raised in triumph. On the screen behind him, a digital ticker showed the status of the acquisition. Transaction complete. Kensington Steel acquired. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian announced to his boardroom of sycophants. They said the debt was too high. They said the sector was dying. But today we own the future. The Kensington site is ours, and by next week the rezoning applications will be filed. Brett clapped the loudest. Brilliant strategy, sir. Securing that bridge loan from Vanguard Shadow at the last minute. Genius. It wasn't genius, Brett. Julian smirked, pouring himself a glass of Cristal. It was magnetism. People want to be in business with winners, and I am a winner. He took a sip, savoring the bubbles. He felt untouchable. He had the land. He had the money. The waitress and her little warnings were a distant memory, a ghost story he had already forgotten. Then his phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. A relentless, angry vibration against the glass table. Then the main doors to the conference room burst open. It wasn't a secretary. It wasn't a client. It was a team of 6 federal agents in blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters on the back EPA. Criminal Investigation Division. Behind them walked 2 uniformed police officers. The room went dead silent. The champagne glass in Julian's hand tilted, spilling expensive vintage onto the carpet. Julian Thorne, the lead agent barked. He was a square-jawed man holding a warrant. I am Thorne. Julian stammered, his face draining of color. What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge in here. I have lawyers. Save it, the agent said, slapping a document onto the table. We are executing a search warrant for the Kensington Steel property and the offices of Thorne Dynamics. We received credible intelligence regarding the concealment of Class 4 toxic waste and the falsification of environmental due diligence reports. Falsification. Julian's voice cracked. I just bought the company this morning. I didn't falsify anything. You signed the acquisition papers knowing the site was a Superfund liability, the agent countered. That makes you liable for the cleanup. And since you attempted to fast-track a commercial rezoning on protected land, that's conspiracy to defraud the city. Julian looked at Brett. Brett was hyperventilating. But, Julian spun around. Get legal on the phone. We can fix this. It's just a fine. We pay the fine. Suddenly the large screen behind him flickered. The transaction complete graphic vanished. It was replaced by a live video feed. The room gasped. On the screen sat Eleanor Vance. She was sitting in a high-backed leather chair in a sleek, modern office. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored white suit that screamed authority. Next to her sat Marcus Sterling. Hello, Julian. Elena's voice boomed through the conference room speakers. It was crisp, clear, and terrifyingly calm. Julian stared at the screen, his mouth agape. You. What is this? Why are you on my screen? I'm calling to discuss the terms of your loan, Elena said, folding her hands on her desk. Clause 14, Section C of the agreement you signed on Saturday night, the Material Adverse Change Clause. Julian felt a cold sweat break out down his back. What are you talking about? The agreement states, Elena continued reciting from memory, that if the borrower Thorn Dynamics becomes the subject of a federal investigation, or if the collateral assets are deemed to have a negative value due to environmental toxicity, the lender Vanguard Shadow has the right to call the loan immediately. She paused for effect. I am calling the loan Julian, all $150 million, plus the 20% default penalty, payable immediately. I don't have that cash, Julian screamed at the screen, ignoring the federal agents who were now seizing laptops around him. I just spent it on the steel mill. You know that? You gave me the money. I know, Elena said coldly. And since you cannot pay cash, I am exercising the collateral option. Clause 15. Julian froze. He remembered the collateral. He had pledged his personal controlling stake in Thorn Dynamics because he was so sure nothing would go wrong. You can't, Julian whispered. It's already done. Marcus Sterling spoke up from beside Elena. Our lawyers filed the lien 10 minutes ago when the EPA raid was confirmed. Your shares have been transferred to Vanguard Shadow to satisfy the debt. Elena leaned into the camera, her eyes locked with Julian's across the digital divide. You don't own Thorn Dynamics anymore, Julian. I do. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The federal agents even paused to watch the drama unfold. Julian looked at his executives. They were looking at the screen, looking at their new boss. They were already calculating how to survive. Julian was dead weight. This is illegal, Julian shrieked, grabbing the table. You set me up. You tricked me. She's a waitress. She served me bread 3 days ago. I served you a lesson, Elena corrected him. You judged me by my uniform. You assumed that because I was serving you food, I was beneath you. You thought your money made you a god. But money is just a tool, Julian, and you don't know how to use it. You only know how to use people. She picked up a document on her desk and signed it. My first act as majority shareholder, Elena announced, is to cooperate fully with the EPA investigation. We are turning over all internal communications regarding the Kensington cover-up, specifically the emails you sent to Brett, ordering him to bury the soil report. Brett let out a whimper. I was just following orders. And my second act, Elena said, her voice turning to steel, is a personnel change. Julian Thorn is hereby terminated as CEO effective immediately. Security, please escort the trespasser off the premises. Julian looked at the door. 2 large security guards, men he had employed, men he had ignored for years, stepped forward. They didn't look sympathetic. Don't touch me, Julian snarled, backing away. I built this company. I am this company. Not anymore, sir, one of the guards said, grabbing Julian's arm firmly. Elena, Julian shouted at the screen, desperation taking over. Elena, wait. Let's make a deal. I can help you. I know the markets. Don't do this. I gave you a $500 tip. I offered you a tip. You offered me an insult, Elena said, her finger hovering over the end call button. You asked me a question to prove I was nothing. Now you have your answer. Please. Julian was being dragged toward the door, his heels skidding on the carpet. I'm Julian Thorne. You can't do this to me." "Goodbye, Mr. Thorne," Eleanor said. She pressed the button. The screen went black. Julian's screams echoed down the hallway as he was hauled out of his own building past the staring eyes of the employees he had terrorized for a decade. He was thrown out onto the sidewalk the same way he had thrown Eleanor out of the restaurant. It began to rain. Julian sat on the wet concrete, his $10,000 suit soaking up the grime of the street. He looked up at the skyscraper he used to own. He checked his pockets. No phone, no wallet. Just a wet, crumpled napkin from the gala. He had nothing. 1 month later, Elena walked into the Obsidian. The restaurant was buzzing. She wore a simple, elegant blouse and slacks. She didn't walk with the heavy tread of a conqueror, but with the light step of someone who was free. "Table for one?" the hostess asked, not recognizing her out of uniform. "Actually, I'm here to see Mr. Henderson." Elena smiled. The manager rushed over, looking nervous. When he saw Elena, he froze. He had heard the rumors. Everyone in the city had. The waitress who became a billionaire. The Wolf of Wall Street who wore an apron. "Eleanor," Henderson gulped. "I am so sorry about that night. I had no choice. Julian." "It's okay, Arthur," Eleanor said gently. "I know how bullies work. They make you afraid, so you forget who you are." She handed him a folder. "What is this?" Henderson asked. "I bought the building," Eleanor said casually. "And I bought the restaurant." Henderson looked like he might faint. "Are you going to fire me?" "No," Elena said. "I'm giving you a raise and a new policy. From now on, the Obsidian has a zero-tolerance policy for abuse of staff. If a customer is rude to a server, no matter how rich they are, no matter what car they drive, you kick them out. Do we have a deal?" Henderson teared up. He nodded vigorously. "Yes. Yes, absolutely." "Thank you, Miss Vance." "Call me Eleanor," she said. She walked over to table 4. It was empty. She placed her hand on the back of the chair where she had stood that night. She thought about Julian. He was currently awaiting trial for fraud and environmental crimes. His assets were frozen. He was being represented by a public defender. The game was over. The ego had cost him everything. Elena turned to the young waitress who was nervously polishing glasses at the station, the same girl, Sarah, who had been too scared to take Julian's table. "Sarah!" Elena called out. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening. "Elena, is it true? Did you really?" "It's true." Elena winked. "Keep the change." She placed a single crisp bill on the table. It wasn't $500. It was a 20, because Elena knew that dignity wasn't bought with grand gestures. It was built on respect. She walked out of the restaurant and into the bright Chicago afternoon, ready for her next shift, not as a server, but as the CEO who knew exactly what everything was worth. Julian Thorne thought his wealth was a shield that allowed him to treat people like dirt. He believed that a uniform defined a person's worth, and that intelligence was the exclusive property of the elite. He learned the hard way that the quietest people in the room are often the ones you should fear the most. Elena didn't just win a bet. She proved that true power isn't about how loud you can shout or how much money you can throw around. It's about knowledge, patience, and the strength to stand your ground when the giants come for you. If you enjoyed this story of karma revenge and the ultimate turnaround, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have taken the company or just the money? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.